Hi, welcome to this edition of Sojourners Along the Way. I have a guest with me today, and I hope that you will listen very attentively because most likely somebody in your life has been involved with the topic of this conversation today. My guest's name is Kelly Cooke, and I am very thankful for you coming.
Sure.
And I want to give you free rein as to whatever you would like to say.
Okay.
And the topic, for those of you that are in southeastern Ohio, and for those of you that are particularly in Athens County, you most likely have heard of My Sister's Place. Kelly is the director of My Sister's Place and has been for the past 6 years, correct?
That's right.
So, and she said that she also worked there prior to being the director of it. So she has quite a bit of experience there and a lot of information to give us. So I have some questions here that I'm going to ask, and let's start with the history of the agency, please.
Sure. My Sister's Place has been in Athens County since 1977. We just celebrated our 40th anniversary last year. We had a big celebration at Stewart's Opera House last fall to commemorate that. And in preparation for that event, I went through a lot of our archives, old meeting minutes, and just a lot of documents that had been saved about the agency, and it was all pretty fascinating. So there was a woman, Carolyn Sue Allen, who was from the Athens area and had been able to escape an abusive relationship, and with a lot of help from her family, she was able to do that, and soon realized that a lot of victims of domestic violence, of course, were not able to do that. And so she started taking victims into her home. So this was a time when not many people had yet understood that domestic violence was a problem. It was not something that was talked about openly. It was more of a family, personal issue. And so out of the women's, the feminist movement of the 70s, a lot of these shelters started coming into existence. And so Carolyn Allen started this organization, and then a couple years later there was a first full-time paid staff member, and it was on from there. Had a couple of different locations. We've been in our current house since about 1988.
That's very good. So
Yeah.
that's quite a history, 1988 till now. You're getting ready to celebrate 30 years in
our
that
in our
house.
current
Your
house.
home.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Mhm.
tremendous.
Yep.
Well, Kelly, I think what you just said leads right into one of the questions that I wanted you to discuss.
Sure.
And that is, how can people identify if there is abuse going on?
I know that seems like it might be an obvious thing, but it's really not for a lot of people. One of the things that people often want to discuss in counseling is this abuse? Is this what I'm experiencing? And a lot of people just aren't sure, whether that's because they've been in the relationship so long that patterns have just kind of become normal, or maybe they grew up in a family where abuse was the norm and they're just not quite sure what a healthy relationship looks like. And so a lot of the behaviors that we see first, I tell students, especially when I meet with them, that most people aren't going to be punched on a first date. That's really not how abuse starts. It's really more about tactics of control and isolating a person, pulling them away from someone that they, from their support system, exerting power over another person. And so anyone who is feeling like they're being restricted in a relationship, like the person they are with is restricting their movements, what they can talk about, what they can wear, who they can see. Those are kind of some early red flags that people should really pay attention to, whether it's themselves or someone that they care about.
I like that you use the phrase red flags.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned about not being punched on the first date. And I've talked with some women. I have helped some women that have been abused, but coming more from a sexual abuse background. And I think this is where a lot of women need to be educated. You don't have to be punched for it to be abuse. You heard Kelly use the words control, manipulated, being denied access to. Listen carefully, because in some cases, and for me this is a very, very sad topic, because it does happen. You know, marriage is supposed to be a safe haven, a loving relationship. And when somebody turns around and is not demonstrating that, take note. And I will speak at this moment specifically to people that are adhering to the Bible. And so I don't know that that may be part of the philosophy that you present to people that come, but I would not at all be surprised if the number of women that come in are from a Christian mindset and tradition, because it has been shoved down women's throats. He's your husband, you must submit to him. I will take you to the scriptures in the book of Ephesians where it uses that phrase, and I will tell you, I have a Master of Divinity from Fuller Theological Seminary. I had the opportunity to study in Greek. No, I don't remember that much Greek right now. However, I do recall, because that was one text, one phrase, one passage that I wanted to study, because by the time I went to seminary, I had already met and helped a number of women who had been abused. And that was always the scripture that they had been given, either by the husband, you're my wife, and you are to do what I say. And it was kind of like, I want to make sure you see this. You're under my thumb, and you do what I say. And if you don't do it, then I have the right to help you to do what you are supposed to do. Listen carefully, women. The very first place that the word submit is used in the Greek, which is translated into English for us, is in the section that says submit one to another. That is the only place that that verb is used, which means it takes precedence over all the others. Submit one to another. It also says later, husbands, love your wives the way that Christ loved the church and was willing to lay down his life for the church. If a husband loves his wife in that manner, he's not going to be hitting her, he's not going to be abusing her. And I think I want to ask you if you would address the other types of abuse, and for women to realize, please, please, it's okay to say this is not the perfect relationship. This is not what I signed up for. I was not expecting this. And I've been wanting Kelly to come on this program for almost a year, so I'm excited that she's here. And I want to make sure that you do the majority of the talking. So please, elaborate a little bit upon what the red flags are. What do they look like? And how would a woman, especially somebody that is coming from that kind of perspective of, but the Bible says, you know, how can you help them to see? Oh, and by the way, a measuring rod for you is, would you treat Jesus like that? Do you think that's the way that Jesus would treat a woman? And if your answers are no, then why should your husband be able to do that? I say that's a huge red flag that something is going on in your relationship that ought not to be. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, so, you know, we're not actually we're not affiliated with any sort of...
I didn't mean to indicate that. So please hear that. That was a Patricia thing. I was not speaking on behalf of my sister's place. That was Patricia talking.
Sure, but
Okay.
it's an important point because, as you say, you know, sure, some women, you know, who receive our services come from that background and have received those messages. That's absolutely a barrier that a lot of women face when they have had those messages that, once you get married, you stay married, and no matter what. It's specifically difficult, I think, when people have messages from clergy members to, stay in the relationship no matter what, even when dangerous things are happening. And so I can't speak from a theological standpoint on that, but
that's my part.
Yeah, go for it. But that is, one thing that we do know is that people who adhere to, let's say, more traditional gender roles are more likely to be in abusive relationships. I'm not putting a value judgment on, what people think about gender roles, but that there is a connection there. And so there's a diagram called the power and control wheel. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's kind of a diagram that we use to explain what we're talking about when we talk about abuse. And so it's called the power and control wheel because the way that we think about relationship abuse, it's not an anger management issue. It's not, a mental illness. It's not that someone's an alcoholic. It's that some people, for various reasons, use tactics of power and control to make another person do what they want. And there are a lot of things that go into that. It's not just about physical abuse. In fact, I'd say that it's far more common that people we serve are experiencing emotional, verbal abuse, which can absolutely be just as damaging and debilitating. And so that might look like being called names or saying, no one else will ever love you, you'd never make it without me, you're not smart, you could never care for these kids on your own. Things that really wear on a person's self-confidence so that they either don't leave or, when they do leave, they have a difficult time imagining how they're going to do this on their own. Threats such as, if you leave me, I'll kill myself. If you leave me, I'll kill our dog. Animal abuse is often comes into play with controlling another person. So using the children either by threatening to take the children or, trying to get the kids on the abuser's side. Your mom doesn't know what she's talking about. She's terrible. She's this and that. I mentioned one thing that I think is very common, especially at the beginning, which is creating an isolated environment. So, it seems like your friends, your mom doesn't like me. Why don't we just hang out with my family? Why don't we just spend time with my friends? And slowly pulling that person away from their support system, which makes that abuse all the more possible and likely. So as I tell college students a lot, once you see that maybe someone is being very hesitant to, kind of walking on eggshells when they're around their partner. Maybe their partner is telling them what they can wear, how much makeup they can wear, where they can go, controlling their finances, really kind of controlling their decision making. Those are some common red flags.
And I would like to ask you just to go through how, if, let's say I'm coming to you and I don't see it. My friends have said to me, Patricia, you're in an abusive relationship.
Right.
You need to get some help.
Right.
And they said, you even need to get out of the house. Contact my sister's place. And since I mentioned that, would you give us your contact information, please?
Yeah, so our mailing address, we do have a confidential address for the shelter, but we can receive mail at P.O. Box 1158. That's in Athens, Ohio, 45701. All of our services are accessed through our hotline, which is answered 24/7, 365 days a year, and that's 1-800-443-3402. We also have a website, which is www.mspathens.org. We also have a Facebook page. It's pretty easy to find.
And to find the Facebook page, what would you tell people?
If you search My Sister's Place Athens, if you can get to our website, there's a link there. That might be the easiest way.
Okay. All right. Please, 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 please get the help. I'm going to give a personal story, not
Sure.
my story, but someone who did confide in me. This was in a church setting. And again, I want to make that clear. I am bringing into this conversation some theological things, and that is not the position of My Sister's Place. That is not where they're coming from. I think I want to be clear that yes, you do help people that are coming from
Sure.
a biblical perspective,
Sure, of course.
but open to everybody and anybody. This happened to be a church situation. A woman confided in me, and from what she was saying, it was very serious abuse. I was trying to show her scripturally that she had the right and the okay of the Bible to leave her husband and to get help. However, I didn't want to directly say to her, you need to leave, because I knew that would be unacceptable to her. After talking to me, she went and spoke to the pastor, who gave the typical answer of, he's your husband, you need to, da-dun-da-dun-da-dun. I went and spoke to that pastor, and I said to him, and this is almost verbatim, do you realize you potentially have sent her to her death? Violence, domestic violence, abuse does not get better unless there is intervention. And this man was not interested in intervention because, anyway, you get the picture. I don't think the pastor ever even thought of that. But that does happen, doesn't it?
Unfortunately, it does. Yes.
Please hear that. That you're hearing from Kelly, okay? Please show Kelly. You are hearing that from Kelly, who I will defer to as the expert in this field because she is the director of My Sister's Place. Please, women, evaluate what is going on. So, can you tell us more? Can you describe and help people to see it, to feel it, to realize? Because a lot of women, I'm going to use the word denial, and I don't think that is just the only word that could be used, but they don't realize, they don't understand, because they don't have a working definition.
Sure. Well, so, I mean, that word definition, it kind of leads me to something that I talk to, groups that I go to, trainings that I've done, where we look at two definitions of domestic violence, one being the legal definition or the law, the ORC code, and then we look at what we call the social definition. So, you know, how we would describe abuse. And I asked them what the difference is. And it's really that the law cares about physical abuse. And that is what can be addressed by law enforcement. And so I would say to them, imagine that you call 911, because I think a lot of people would say, you know, I would just call the police. Just call the police if that happens to you. And so I say, well, imagine calling 911 and saying, yes, I need help. My husband of 20 years, last night we were arguing, and he said that if I were to leave him, he would commit suicide, or he would take custody of our children. I have not been allowed to work outside of the house, and so I have no work experience. He has told me that I'm not to speak to my mother because she does not like how he treats me, and so I've not talked to her for 5 years. He, you know, doles out an allowance for me to take care of, you know, very basic needs in the home. He has, at times when we've been arguing, he will get out his gun and clean it.
And what you're saying is all based on true stories.
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
hear that.
Yeah.
She's not making this up. These are true experiences that have been related to you.
He's told me that I'm stupid and that no one would ever be with me if I were to leave him. On and on and on. And then I say to the students, what do you think that 911 dispatcher would say? That person has not done anything that's illegal. And there's really nothing that law enforcement can do in that situation, unfortunately. And so I think there's really a myth here that it's as simple as calling the police or the sheriff to correct this behavior. And the truth is that there's just not much that law enforcement can do with the way that relationship abuse usually plays itself out.
I like that you use the word relationship abuse. Can you dig into that a little bit more, maybe
Sure.
unpack it for us?
Yeah, it's not always someone that you live with. Domestic violence is. Again, we're getting back to the law and what can be prosecuted and such. But we assist people who are experiencing abuse from maybe a mother or a son. It could be somebody, clearly that you're in a relationship with that you don't live with. And so there are lots of different types of abuse in lots of different types of relationships. The most common is a romantic relationship, husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, where people are living together. But there are many more relationships that can be abusive.
But we don't want that.
No.
We want to do away with it. We want your safety. That is key.
Sure.
Now, someone has come to my sister's place. I'm kind of going away from my
Sure,
list
no
of
problem.
questions here. Someone came to my sister's place and has gotten to the point that they recognize, yeah, this is abuse. I need help. What will my sister's place do? What can they expect when they come or make contact?
Yeah.
And again, would you give us that number, please?
Sure. Yeah, so we have a hotline. It's at 1-800-443-3402. I wish it made some sort of phrase, but it doesn't. It's just a hard to remember number. And we answer that 24 hours a day. Again, 365 days a year. We have somebody on staff around the clock answering that hotline.
May I?
Sure.
May I interject for a moment? I don't know if people are aware of 112. No, sorry,
211.
211. 112. That is a good number for you also. 112 will take you to the nearest emergency police, okay? I tested it out, yeah.
Oh, wow.
May I interject something
Sure.
else? Okay, I just read about somebody that an unmarked police car was behind them. They had the red light on top of the roof, and the person didn't, it was a woman, single woman in the car, did not feel comfortable. So what she did was, instead of pulling over, and you have the right to do this because I checked this out, you just keep driving and call 112. That will get you in touch with the closest police to wherever you are. And she found out that what they did was they sent several squad cars and found out the guy that had that red light above his roof of the vehicle was a known rapist and had other felonies. So please, again, women, learn how to protect yourself, okay? Anyway, the number you need to call that I think my sister's place would be a way for you to get the number is call 211, right? If they do that, they'll ask you where you are, so you tell them you want Athens County, my sister's place, and then they can give you the number to get in touch with my sister's place. Okay, so now someone has come to you and they don't know what to ask you, they don't know what to say.
Sure. Yeah, so all of our services originate in that hotline. And so that's kind of the gateway to the services that we provide, which is more than just shelter, which I always try to remind people of because I think people are not aware that we do provide services outside of shelter. So typically how that call would go is the person answering the phone would ask to just hear some about the situation that's happening, including, are you in need of shelter? Do you have children that you need to shelter? And people do not always need shelter who are in these relationships that are abusive. Sometimes people have someone else to stay with. Maybe the abuser is already in jail, and so shelter is not immediately needed. But the person answering that phone is going to help the caller figure out what services are needed. If shelter is not immediately in need, there is what we call outreach counseling, which is, it takes place outside of our shelter, also at an undisclosed location, but it is easily accessible on the bus route. And so people can access outreach counseling once, or, we've had people in that program for a year or two. It's really whatever people need. And so that's free counseling with a licensed mental health professional, where there would be a diagnostic assessment, and then sessions just based on the needs of that person. We also have a full-time court advocate who is in the court every day, helping people file civil protection orders, or just accompanying people through the court process, which can be a very confusing, intimidating process if you've never been through it before. And then, of course, we do have shelter. We have 10 beds for 3 counties, and so we are often full, unfortunately, but victims of domestic violence can come with their children and stay really as long as they need. There's a lot that goes into that phrase, as long as they need, but we do try to offer shelter for as long as people need that. And so the shelter is, it's a house, it's not institutional, it's very home-like. We have 4 bedrooms. We try to make it so that people who are not related to each other don't have to share bedrooms, but that does happen sometimes. There's a shared kitchen, shared bathroom. Residents have chores and are responsible for cooking their own meals, although we do provide food. We can provide transportation to appointments, and in the shelter there's individual counseling and there's groups. And we just try to offer a lot of support when people are in shelter. And so a phone call would kind of go through those options, talking with the person about what service would be best.
Okay. You've mentioned a lot of things that are available, and as you were talking about having professional counselors, having people that can help with court, I'm seeing dollar signs. And I want to ask a question about, where do the funds come from?
Sure. So we are a licensed mental health facility, which is somewhat unusual for a domestic violence program. That's not super common. But what it means is that we are licensed through Ohio Mental Health and Addiction Services, which means that we have regular visits through that agency to make sure that we are providing quality services to people. It means that we can only hire licensed mental health professionals as our clinicians. And it also means that we can bill Medicaid, and that we receive funding through the Athens-Hocking-Vinton 317 board, because we are a mental health agency. So that gives us some stability in our funding. We also receive funding through the Attorney General's office and through the Office of Criminal Justice Services. So those are the main sources of our funding.
I'm going to have to ask you to repeat those last 2.
Sure.
Because my mouth just dropped open.
It's
like, you're kidding me. You're from the Attorney General's?
Yeah, and that's because we provide services to victims of crime. And so the Attorney General's office has a victims of crime unit, which funds a number of different agencies for a number of different victims, and domestic violence programs fall under that umbrella. And then likewise, the Office of Criminal Justice Services has grants available, including the Violence Against Women Act funding, the Family Violence Prevention Act funding, that our program is eligible for, and we've received those resources for a lot of years.
I am very happy to hear that, because I've always been concerned about, where are the funds coming from. there are so many questions I want to ask you, but for right now, what would you say you really, really, really want to make sure that the audience gets to hear?
That you deserve a life free of abuse. That it is not okay if someone in your life is controlling you, making you feel worthless, harming you physically, certainly. That is not okay. And you have the right to be safe and to live a life free of abuse. There are options, there are resources in our community. We will do whatever we can to address what you need, even if you don't need shelter. I would just encourage people to call. The person on the other end of that hotline has been trained to listen and to offer resources, referrals, to encourage you and to and really just to listen to what you're going through. Also, just know that you are not alone. That unfortunately, this is quite common. We believe 1 in 4 women experience abuse at some point during their lifetimes. And so, unfortunately, this does happen to a lot of people, not just women. It happens to men too, in all circles. You know, so it's not something that is just in one segment of our society. Unfortunately, this is just something that cuts across all lines.
Okay. I wish that wasn't true.
Me too. Me too.
And my heart cries, especially for the women that don't think that's what they're experiencing.
Right.
This is actually part B of the conversation with My Sister's Place. I have Kelly Cooke, who is the director of My Sister's Place. And I want to reiterate some information that has already been given. And then I want to tell you a couple of things that were not part of the first half. Well, I guess I'm going to start with that. Unfortunately, another person was going to be with us, but earlier today, she had to take somebody to the emergency room and is not able to be with us, the case manager of My Sister's Place. And sadly, it was not a medical situation. It was an abusive situation. Please, women, please pay attention. There is a hotline that you can call, even if you're not sure, even if you would not say it is abuse. I've had some women tell me, well, he didn't use a knife. He didn't threaten me with a gun. That's way beyond abuse. Being hit, being yanked, being pulled, these are things you need to talk to somebody about. And My Sister's Place would be an excellent place to get information from. That hotline is 1-800-443-3402. Off camera, Kelly and I spoke about the Attorney General giving, I think you said it was for salaries, correct?
Yes, primarily.
Okay. Yes, and so there are a lot of professionals associated with My Sister's Place. The Attorney General, the Office of Criminal Justice Services, and the 317 Board all do give to My Sister's Place for the running of the facilities. But there's still need for more. You know, it takes a lot of money to provide for all the food, all of the needs of running a house, like our electric and gas, water, all those things. Money has to come from someplace, so I'm putting in a plug. You can send a check for donations to P.O. Box 1158, Athens, A-T-H-E-N-S, Ohio 45701. And that's another way you can get in touch with My Sister's Place and ask them for information about My Sister's Place. please, I can't tell you, my heart is so heavy hearing about our other guests not being able to be here because of an abusive situation, and an article that I just read the other day. It makes me want to cry. It does. It makes me want to cry when I hear of things that are happening, and they ought not to be. Okay, Kelly, I think I got it out of my system. So, question. Fits right in to my giving the hotline.
Yeah.
What happens when somebody calls the hotline?
Sure. So we have that number staffed 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. There's someone answering that hotline who has been through a whole lot of training and is able to field really any number of calls that we were to get. People call with a lot of different requests and questions at that hotline. But we have a person we call a shelter aide who answers that line. And really she's just going to ask to hear about what is going on in that person's situation. Sometimes people call and they know they need to come in for shelter. Sometimes people just call and they want to talk about the abuse they're experiencing. Sometimes people call and they're not sure if they're experiencing abuse or what's happening in the relationship is abuse. So you don't really need to, have any idea in mind about what you need. It's really just for people who want to talk about what's going on. So the shelter aide's going to listen just to what's been going on, and then we'll probably make a recommendation as far as a service that would be most appropriate. And so for some people that is shelter, and that's usually going to be when someone's experiencing some type of physical abuse and is not able to stay in their home because it's unsafe. In those situations, it's usually that someone is also not able to stay with a family member or a family member, and so, a friend or a family member, and so we would offer shelter to that person if we had space. Other services might be suggested if the person does not need shelter, so that could be outreach counseling, which is a service that we have outside of the shelter. We have an office also with an undisclosed location, but that's outreach counseling with a mental health professional, a licensed social worker, and so we have people who have been in that service for a couple of years, or sometimes people want to just go one time.
Okay. Now, previously, we spoke about you're in the same house for approximately 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
If it was possible, if there were the finances, would my sister's place use larger a house, or to expand what you do have if there's space available to do that?
Right. So actually we just received funding through the Athens Hocking Benton 317 board and the Osteopathic Heritage Foundation to add a bedroom and a bathroom onto the shelter. And those are both going to be ADA accessible. That's something we've been wanting to do for a long time, is just to be able to serve people with mobility challenges. And so we'll be able to take people who are in a wheelchair, again, bedroom and bathroom, that would be accessible. And so and then we will be adding an 11th bed with that bedroom.
Okay. If it were possible, because now you're saying 11 beds, and just from what I know of the region, I would, the number that I keep thinking of is 20, and I don't even think that's really enough.
Right.
But that would increase the amount of staff you would need.
Right, exactly.
The amount of food for providing meals to people.
Right.
Everything increases, because that would almost be doubling.
Right.
I mean, you're talking about now you can have 11,
Right.
but presently it's 10, so
Yeah.
20 would be doubling.
Yeah.
I'd like to see that happen, and I hope, viewing audience, you would like to see that happen, because unfortunately the need is there. We need to be helping people, and sadly for too many women, they don't recognize that what is going on is abuse. I'm hoping that you will take advantage of that hotline, and I'm going to give you that number again. I believe in repetition. I come from an educational background, so the more it's repeated, hopefully you'll write it down. 1-800-443-3402. Please call. Please call. Ask questions. You'll get good answers, and that may lead to you getting help. What do you do to help clients who have financial needs? As long as we're talking about money, people coming in. Some of them just come in with the clothes that they're wearing, and that's it.
Sure. Yeah, so while people are in shelter, we do provide for their basic needs. We have donated clothing on hand. We provide food for everyone. Shelter residents are responsible for cooking their own meals, but we do provide food. We provide limited transportation when our case manager is able to do that. But we also have a program through a grant that comes through the Allstate Foundation. Allstate, as in the insurance company, has chosen financial literacy for domestic violence victims as one of their causes. And so they've established a whole curriculum it's called Moving Forward, and it's a curriculum that we do with our residents for people who are wanting to better their financial standing. And so whether that is saving for their own car or starting a bank account, we kind of meet people where they're at as far as their financial lives go. But we also have a matching program, and so up to, I believe it's $2,000, people can put money into a savings account, and we will match that to encourage savings as they start to establish themselves and try to make it on their own.
Which is definitely needed. Go for it. Go for it. Now, what about women who have children? How do you help the children who have witnessed abuse, or I'm going to add, may even have experienced abuse themselves?
Sure. Yeah, so children are able to come to the shelter with their parents, staying in the same room, of course, and we assist with getting children enrolled in school. But about 2.5 years ago, through that funding through the Attorney General's office, we were able to increase the hours of one of our counselors who now sees children in counseling. That's something that we've been wanting to do for a long time. And so for about 2.5 years, she's been meeting with kids, either to talk about abuse that they have experienced themselves, or that they have witnessed with their parents. So we've really been very happy to be able to provide that service there in-house. Our counselor just knows a lot about trauma, the effects of trauma, knows a lot about kids, and so that's been a wonderful service to be able to provide to our residents and kids.
Now, I want to point out that a couple of times Kelly has said that is something we have wanted to do for a long while, a long time. What do you think the holdup is there? Answer: finances. So please, my sister's place is a good place to give donations. And I will give you that mailing address again. I should have it memorized by now. It's P.O. Box 1158, Athens, Ohio. Please give generously. That's coming from Patricia. Okay, Kelly did not ask me to say these things, but my sister's place, since the time I have heard of their existence, has been on my heart, because I am aware of a number of abusive situations and a number of women who, again, well, he didn't use a knife, he didn't threaten me with a gun. No, that's way beyond abuse. That is, he needs to be taken out of the home. And I won't go any further than saying that, okay? But there are many things that are needed. You're saying clothing. Can people donate clothes?
People can donate clothes. We really do have limited storage space in our shelter, but another option that people always have is to donate to Goodwill. And if you put on the bags or boxes that you donate to Goodwill, credit to my sister's place, we get the credits for that donation, and then we can take people to Goodwill to pick out their own items with those credits. So that works well too.
Yeah, that sounds
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
So you bring the stuff to Goodwill and tell Goodwill, credit this to my sister's place. And then when there is a need, then the person can get something they like.
Right.
And that would be really nice. So please take advantage of that. Now, a biggie. What about people who have pets?
So people with pets, that's a barrier that we have, again, long identified as it's something that in the past was really keeping people from accessing our shelter services. So at least a couple of times a year when someone would call our hotline and were told that they could not bring animals to the shelter, they would decide not to come in. And so that is because animals are often used as part of the abuse. And so there's just been a lot of research in the last few years about the connection between animal abuse and relationship abuse. And there was a study done a few years ago that said that 71% of pet-owning victims of domestic violence had had the life of their pet threatened, or it was the pets were used as part of the abuse. And so that would look something like, if you ever leave me, I'll kill our dog. You know, if you don't come back, I'll kill the cat, something like that. Unfortunately, it's just a common way that people choose to control other people. So unfortunately, the abuse of animals is just a way that people often use to control another person. And so we have been able to build a shelter in our shelter's backyard so that people can bring their animals to shelter, kids can see their pets, and the animals are safe. And so we've really been able to reduce that barrier, and people with pets who are at risk of harm can bring them in.
So please don't let anything keep you from going in. And did you catch the phrases that Kelly was using? Control, abusing an animal to keep the female in the home. And I would say it's really not a home, because the home should be filled with love, not with all kinds of threats, and if you don't do this, then I'm going to do that. Think about things that have been said. What category do they come under? Do you feel fear? And I'm going to ask that as a question to you. Now, as far as I know, I do know somebody that was at the shelter previously. But how many of the women need help to work through fear? Not necessarily looking for a number, but you know.
Sure. I mean, I think that anyone who has experienced any type of abuse has likely been, someone who has experienced fear, control, having that power exerted so that your movements are controlled, so that you're not able to make your own decisions. It is very often couched in these terms of fear, whether that's physical, sexual violence. That is just a very common way for people to make people do what they want them to do. And so I would say especially people who are at our shelter have experienced physical intimidation or abuse, and yes, have been fearful, of course.
What would physical intimidation look like?
So, kicking, hitting, punching, those are unfortunately, probably the most common types of physical abuse, but it could also be, threatening that abuse, cleaning weapons during an argument, displaying weapons around the house, where there's an intimidation factor, a threat. Maybe it's not even a verbal threat, but just an implied show of intimidation, physical threat.
Okay. You brought up the next question I wanted to ask you. What is verbal abuse? Without using any of the explosives.
Yeah. So verbal abuse I would describe as, name calling, insults, making someone feel that they are less than, that, no one will ever love you, no one else would ever be with you. I think it's very close to emotional abuse. Sometimes those are used interchangeably. It's a very debilitating type of abuse. I've heard our clients say that all abuse is emotional abuse because it hurts. It is probably the most debilitating, tactics. It's something that really sticks with people. It wears on people's self-confidence and self-esteem. And people really start to feel like they are not able to make it on their own. Those messages really kind of sink in, and people start to feel just beaten down by those things.
You definitely sound very knowledgeable about all of this. Do the people, the women who stay at the shelter, have access to you?
Well, I don't do a lot of direct service anymore. I used to be a counselor at the shelter, kind of decided that I was much better with budgets and numbers and supervising staff. But we do have a number of direct service staff in the shelter. I'm just more on the end of budgets and the board and the public and things like this.
So the administrative side. Because we really didn't talk about your history with this shelter. And I forget how many years you said you've been there, because I knew it was a good number.
Yeah, so I've been director for a little over 6 years, but I worked at my sister's place when I was an undergraduate at OU. I was a shelter aide, so the position that I mentioned that answers the phone overnight, I would do shifts from 4 p.m. to 8 a.m., staffing the shelter overnight, and then get up and go to class.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Shifting gears must have been challenging.
Yeah, I love the agency. I really love being there, and I still do.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
I hope it stays that way for you.
Yeah, thanks.
Question that some may be going through some people's minds. What challenges does a woman face when she comes and is going to be part of my sister's place by staying there, a resident?
So, one thing to keep in mind about people who are staying at the shelter is that, our average income, I believe, for residents at the shelter is around $1,200 a month. And so people are really already struggling financially a lot of the times. People who, there are many victims of domestic violence who don't come to our shelter, sometimes because they have someone else to stay with. But people who are at the shelter do tend to have pretty low income and are struggling just with some of the day-to-day expenses that we all have. And so I think that it's common that people are facing a low income, maybe a lack of transportation, so a lack of a vehicle. And as we all know in Southeast Ohio, our public transportation options are limited, especially once you get out of the city of Athens and out into the county. And so people struggle with accessing affordable housing. One thing that's difficult about Athens is that the student population really tends to kind of drive up housing costs artificially. For Southeast Ohio, the rent rates that we have in the city are just really inflated because students...
I'll jump in.
Okay.
I'll say it. I have said this publicly, so I will now say it more publicly. I want the students to learn how to do math. If you have one apartment that has maybe 4 bedrooms in it and everybody's paying $1,500, that is too much money Please, students, learn how to do the math. It's not just what are you paying. Even if you're paying $750 for one apartment, one room, that's still a lot of money. And I want to say to the landowners, do a service to the community. Don't be so greedy. And yes, I did actually say that. I'm on record for it, because greed is not a good thing. Helping people is a very good thing. Thank you. I got that out of my system. I'm sorry. Did you want to add? Did you want to add to that?
You know, if you imagine someone coming into the shelter who's struggling financially, lack of transportation, maybe has 2 or 3 kids, and is now trying to imagine how they're going to not just provide for these children financially, but caring for them, and on top of all this, on top of trying to figure out where they're going to live, how they're going to get around, maybe insurance, health insurance, all of this. Like I mentioned previously, they've also been told a lot of things about themselves that make it difficult to believe that they can kind of transcend all of these challenges. And so that's a lot of what we spend our time doing, is helping people kind of work through the messages that they've been fed about themselves, but also working on those practical needs of income, housing, getting health care, and all that. So a lot of challenges, but none are insurmountable. That's what we're here for. We try to help people just kind of pick through all of those barriers that they have.
Yeah. And I want to add, too, that I think that typically women are thinking, that happens to everybody else. Mm-hmm. That's not happening to me. That mm-hmm. can't be me. Mm-hmm. But abuse does not have any social, economic guidelines, does it?
No, absolutely not. And that is a common misconception. But this truly is something in our society that happens across all lines, income, race, everything. It certainly does happen in all types of relationships, in all income levels, and I think it's the case that some people are able to hide it more easily than others, but we have had people of all types, in our programs, people connected to the university, professionals of all types. It really, unfortunately, is something that people of all circles experience.
Kelly, in the moments that we have left, what is there that you really want to leave with our audience?
Sure. I guess I would just, want to speak to anyone who feels like maybe something's not quite right in their relationship. If you have kind of a gut instinct that you're not being treated well, something beyond just normal relationship problems, but that someone is trying to control you in some way, who is, trying to exert power over you in a way that just doesn't feel right, I think it is right to question that, and we have people at our agency who can just kind of help you think through that. Calling us does not mean that you are bound to any sort of service. Again, we have someone answering the hotline 24 hours a day who can just kind of help you think through what's happening, think about what options you might have. I guess I also just want to always make sure that people know that we have more than shelter available. I think our name has become synonymous with shelter, and that certainly is a lot of what we do. But we have counseling services, we have a full-time court advocate. Even if you're not in need of a place to stay, we still have ways that we can help if you feel like something in your relationship is not right.
Kelly, thank you very much.
Yeah,
and I hope it goes very well.
Sure, thanks.
And audience, I hope you will take advantage of the services available to you through My Sister's Place. Court advocate, that sounds tremendous. Hope you're never in that situation, but realistically, it does happen. So Kelly, thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you very much.